Hi, I'm Adam from 10 Square Games, and welcome to Be Ahead of the Game, a series of interviews where we talk to people responsible for delivering our great games to the world. In this video, you'll find out what it takes to become a video game marketer at TSG and the strategies we use to promote our games. Hi, Selena. Welcome to our interview. Thank you for joining us. So let's start with the basics. Could you please introduce yourself to our audience and tell them what you do at 10 Square Games?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And thanks for having me, Adam. So my name is Selina. I am head of growth at 10 Square Games, which means that I get to work with a team of about 30 talented people across a lot of growth topics, which means publishing topics. So from within our team, we run user acquisition. We make all of the creatives for the app stores. We handle app store optimization and relations with the platforms. We help grow revenue for our games through ad monetization. We drive influencer marketing, and we work together with PMMs, which is product marketing managers, who are basically the growth advocates in every single product that we help support.
So what got you into working in basically gaming marketing, I guess we could say? Are you a gamer, or do you approach it more from the outside looking in?
I wouldn't really classify myself as a gamer. However, I would say that throughout my whole life, I have played games. So I remember Duck Hunt with my dad, which I think is the oldest memory going back, sitting in front of the TV, with the guns. Obviously, afterwards there was a lot of Mario. Then I remember in high school playing Tomb Raider and Final Fantasy with a friend of mine. She was the brains and was solving the puzzles, and I was the idiot running around and shooting basically. And afterwards, I just played casual games, right? So kind of when mobile gaming started, and I had an early iPad at some point, I was getting a little bit into mobile games and very much the casual kind of mobile games. However, all of my career has been very much in the non-casual games. How I ended up in gaming was actually quite a coincidence. It was not something that was planned. So at some point, I was working in marketing already previously, but I was working for a bank back when I lived in the Netherlands, and I moved to Berlin. And it was kind of a coincidence. And then a friend of mine at the time knew somebody that worked for Gameloft, which is where I started my gaming career. And I was looking for a job, so we went for lunch, and he was like, "Oh, I think you can do this," and that's how I started to work in gaming. So pretty random, and I wasn't even aware that you could make, let's say, a good living working in games. When I started back in Gameloft, which is 8-9 years ago.
Obviously, your focus now is planning the strategy, planning the overall outlook of what's going on, basically in marketing our games. So, what kind of methods do you use while planning that strategy?
I mean, there are a lot of different components that go into that. So first of all, there are a lot of different functions. So as I just said, within the growth team, we do a lot of the different publishing related functions, and all of those come together into creating the strategy and the growth strategy for a game. Most of that we're just getting channeled through the product marketing manager, who is the one main responsible for that title and works together with user acquisition, app store optimization, influencer marketing, all the other functions. What's important to distinguish is different stages that the games are in. So obviously, we have two larger titles, Fishing Clash and Hunting Clash. Both of these are globally live, which means that we have a lot of historical data. We have a lot of experience with user acquisition, targeting of audiences, different techniques to use within the creatives. And then we have new games that are coming to our portfolio. And these they require a very different approach. So on one hand, for Fishing Clash and Hunting Clash, we kind of know what the audiences are, what the core audiences are, and how we can best address these potential players to come into our games. Whereas for a lot of the new games, we still need to do a lot of research around target audiences. and what kind of creative approaches and what kind of messaging and what kind of narrative that we shall lay out for that particular game. So these two things are kind of different disciplines, and they kind of require different approaches.
So would you say like there are different benchmarks for different stages of a game's development?
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, one of the things that everybody working in marketing will be quite familiar with is like the return on ad spend or the return on investment, right? So ultimately, what we do on a daily basis is we spend a lot of money in order to get players into our game, and we need to make sure that these players return the investments basically towards us. So it means that there are a lot of different optimization mechanics that go into place. But for these live titles that we are, let's say, supporting with marketing for a longer period of time, we have very clear goals of kind of how, let's say, that payback would have to look like. For new launches, however, we don't know a lot of pieces of this puzzle. So it is about technical launches, first of all, to make sure that the products are stable, getting an understanding of the target audience, the kind of creatives that are appealing to the players out there. And then from there on, we'll start to gather data. And all of that data flows into the equation of understanding the business case, which then ultimately, when these products become, let's say, global launch products, when they are in a fully live mode, we are largely applying the same mechanics as I've just explained for the other kind of titles.
Speaking of metrics in video game marketing, how much of a skill set from traditional marketing applies to video marketing? Does it depend on a position, or is it a thing where it's just a skill set that translates anyway? Is it just an approach?
No, I would say that the skill set is quite different from very traditional marketing. So I think we can dissect that in a few parts, right? Because as you say, you have very traditional marketing, which is maybe more focused on branding. So essentially share of voice and getting the message of the brand or the slogan or the imagery or whatever out there as much as possible. And then, of course, we have kind of digital marketing, but digital marketing in different sectors than gaming, right? I would say that fully traditional marketing, which is really focusing a lot on branding, is a little bit less applicable to what it is that we do within gaming, because we work with a lot of data. There is a very high level of analytical skills that are also necessary, particularly for the user acquisition managers and the user acquisition piece, which still will be the part where the largest sum of the marketing money on a monthly basis will go to. So these are kind of two different disciplines. What is interesting, though, is that it is somewhat changing. So there has been a lot of changes in the market over the last year. One of the more notable things on iOS, where we have been faced with the deprecation of the device ID, which basically means we are not able to track, target, measure very precisely anymore on iOS, which kind of means that more traditional marketing things do come into play there. So branding, share of voice, different ways of buying, different ways of measurement of the impact of the marketing money that we are spending, that are maybe more native to, let's say, the traditional marketing, are becoming a bit more applicable. But I would still say that it's kind of a different skill set. Now, when it comes to digital marketing, but in other sectors than gaming, these can be definitely relevant for gaming as well. So if we look at all of the ride-hailing apps or the food delivery services, or any of these larger industries, or e-commerce, clothing, fashion, there is definitely a lot of overlap that we see there. In terms of when we are searching for people to join our team or like people applying to us, these are also definitely sectors that we do look at. And I would encourage everybody that has an interest in gaming, or is a gamer but has a background in digital marketing but in a different sector, to also definitely try out applying in the gaming industry. Yes.
Yes. So you've spoken about the changes to the gaming industry. How much has it changed in terms of marketing since you entered it? Because I think it might be a lot here.
I mean, Yeah, I mean, since I entered like in the gaming industry 8 years ago, it has been massive changes, and I won't, I almost like sound like a dinosaur when talking about these things, so I probably won't go, all the way back to how it was. But yeah, the market has moved a lot of good things. There's been a lot more sophistication, as in when I started, it was the whole part of tracking, and tracking your performance in cohorted metrics to truly understand what is happening to the marketing money that you're spending, and the players entering into the game and their progression was very different. So the market has moved on in a lot of positive ways. A lot of tooling has become available to make life a hell of a lot easier for mobile marketing people. On the other hand, it's also made it more, searching for the right word, but tools are easier available to everybody. So it means that everybody kind of can start from, a better level. So it is sometimes more difficult to have like a competitive advantage into there, because we all have already so many good tools to our availability. Then, however, the last year has been quite a change. So, as I just already said, iOS 14 deprecation of the IDFA. It is not just that topic in itself, but it has kind of opened up a whole bunch of different discussions around measurement, around impact of the marketing money, around measurement around the last click, which is a measurement standard that's being used, versus actual impact that all kind of different partners have within your media mix. So we're talking about mixed media models. That has been one of a massive change. I can say it's been the most challenging year last year than I've had in my career previously. It's also good because what I always loved about gaming is the fact that not a half a year is the same. Like there's always something happening in the industry. It being massive consolidations, which makes the market more competitive, and thus you have to think about different methods, partners changing certain ways of optimization that is like challenging on a creative front, or now the whole discussion around privacy and the changes that it brings to the measurement on iOS, but also thinking about what's going to happen on Android going forward, is always something is happening, which is what I love, but it's a challenge from time to time.
It's a big question, I think, for everybody in marketing, even outside the gaming marketing, what will happen with all the data, because we have a lot of data now, how much of it we'll get to keep. But you were talking about the challenge of an industry where everybody's basically on an even playing field. Would you say that?
Almost, yeah.
Right now, it's mostly a challenge of finding the right people to create something that will stand out, because I think everybody can relate to the fact that if they play a lot of games, they'll see a lot of ads, and it might be hard to find one that's actually going to stand out from the fold. Would you say that?
I mean, so I think what is, like, for example, creative is what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
So when you're playing a game and you see another ad, and then like, what is the creative that has been made that is trying to convince you to, click and install and start to play that other game. So creative has always been very important within the whole marketing cycle. I would say though that it is becoming of a more and more important nature, because what happens is that we become less precise when it comes to targeting, or like searching these different audiences, right? Also for our partners, like for example, Facebook and Google, there are less and less signals available where they can quickly understand if, let's say, that particular part of the audience that they are serving the ads to is, let's say, a good audience for the advertiser, for us, yes or no. So that's the direction that we are, let's say, investing heavily in. Like almost half of our team is creative designers, so motion designers and 3D and 2D graphics. So that should kind of indicate how important that aspect is for us.
Yeah, and I think piggybacking to that question about traditional marketing, being a creative worker myself as a copywriter, I think if there's one skill set that really translates across those branches, I think it's that creativity. It's just creating something that's noticeable.
Yeah, and like definitely looking into like really art direction. And I think there we still have a lot to learn from the big brands, right? So like we are lucky enough to also have a consumer insights department here within TSG, which means that we can work with them in order to conduct surveys to get an understanding of audience that and players that we have within the game, maybe untouched audiences or players that there are within the market. We could start to build player personas and then again tailor kind of messaging towards these different audiences. So it's a very important function to have. But I think there we still have a lot to learn from quote unquote the traditional marketing, or like let's say the Coca-Colas of the world that are obviously extremely strong in branding. Yeah.
So we're speaking about changes basically all the time here, and I think a big change that is kind of an elephant in the room in every interview at this point is the pandemic. And because you joined TSG during the pandemic, and I know because I actually worked with Selena in wargaming before, so we know each other from the office days, if you will.
Yeah.
So knowing that you worked in an office before in a very like collaborative environment in an office, how did you deal with transitioning to managing a remote team, basically spread around the world?
Yeah. So I started in April of last year. So like we were kind of, let's say, used to pandemic because it was ongoing, but definitely starting a new job with a remote team during that period of time was interesting. Um, on one hand, let's say in my personal life, I see like a lot of advantages on the whole, like working from home situation. I have two quite young kids. One is still at home with somebody looking after him, but me being home means that I can see him more. I can spend more time with him. I'm a bit more flexible as well into like addressing my day, even doing the simple stuff of like making some lunch or emptying a dishwasher or doing a laundry or anything like that. I enjoy that, and I kind of see that I arrange my day differently than when I was working in the office. You need to be able to understand the finesses that you get when you actually get to know somebody more in a face-to-face matter, right? So there's a lot of communication. I think sometimes we over communicate a little bit, but there's a lot of communication on Slack. There are many calls happening, but particularly when it comes to written communication, I think it's vital that you also get to know these people, because it can be interpreted so wrong so easily. So I actually spent some time as soon as I could in the office and started to get to know people, spend a lot of time with them on calls, and believe that we are with that in a good balance. So I definitely see that this is also a situation to stay in a way. I will not move to Poland, like I will remain remote from my team. But with the right level of investment and travels, it's very doable to do so.
So you've been in marketing a long time. So if you had any tips, like 2 or 3 maybe, for would-be video game marketers, what would they be?
I mean, play games, because it doesn't always start there. So you need to understand games. Like there is a lot of communication that gets done with the product teams as well, with the game team. So people from different disciplines within the game team. So we're talking about designers, or we're talking about live ops, or product owners. So you need to be able to speak their language, and obviously you need to like have a passion for what you do, right? Which within mobile marketing can be like, you can be crazy about data and messaging, but you're still working for games, so you definitely need to have some kind of affinity with games and play games, and obviously having a strong analytical interest and background is very relevant.
I would say even for creative people, I think what I actually learned working in the gaming industry is that even if you're creative, if you write, if you draw, if you make videos, I think it's important to always keep those analytics in mind.
And it's a challenge, right? Because it's like kind of different, different parts of the brain, basically. So that's why it's also like not so easy, because even looking at user acquisition or looking at the creative people, like for user acquisition, we kind of, expect that people also utilize their creative side of the brain in order to think about different ways on how to get the game out there and the different kind of messages. And then for the creative people, we also expect them in a way to be able to have an interest in and understanding of the metrics and how to interpret them in order to create, further assets.
Speaking of creatives, a lot of our creatives have a Wheel of Fortune on them. That's one of the gaming classics, and we have a Wheel of Fortune right here.
Nice.
With, unfortunately, no prizes here, only tough, challenging, fun questions. So are you ready to give it a spin? Threw me off, of course.
Absolutely. Let's go.
Awesome, let's go. We're at the Wheel of Fortune now. The rules are pretty simple. I'm going to spin the wheel. Whatever answer lies in one of these envelopes, you just have to answer as honestly as possible. So are you ready to spin?
I'm terrified, but go ahead.
Okay. All right, we have our question here. And this is a tough question, actually. What was your toughest management decision? What have you learned from it?
I think, having to say goodbye to people is always like not a nice thing. So I think the very first time that I had to do that was rather terrifying and very, very difficult. I think, however, it is like sometimes it's just necessary. Sometimes people are not a good fit. Sometimes they are not on the level where you expect them to be. And I think it's most important, or what I try to do within messaging whenever that is kind of like necessary, is one, to be very honest and authentic, and to hope to install, let's say, some insights in the people with whom you need to have that conversation. So hopefully they will learn something from it. But it's always a tough thing to do, and I think it will remain one of the things that you just don't really want to have to do.
Oh, yeah, that's a real tough question. Thank you for answering it with so much candor.
Yeah.
All right, Selena, so we're back from the wheel. How did you enjoy the question?
It was definitely a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
Awesome. So we have one last question. We ask this every guest, and it's simple. It relates to the gaming industry as a whole, so not just mobile or PC and console, but what is the future of the gaming industry?
You call that simple?
The question is simple. The answer won't be.
No. I find it daring to say, but I think there are a few things that are currently happening that are pretty prominent that are here to stay. I would say I call out two things. One is consolidation, right? So we've seen a lot of takeovers, a lot of big, massive takeovers, acquisitions of companies happening in last year, and even this year was already a quite unprecedented start, which I would expect here to stay and possibly even expand. And why that is relevant is because we see mobile companies becoming bigger, but we see mobile companies and console or PC companies becoming closer and closer together, and basically making sure that the whole ecosystem in a way can be fed by one big company. And ultimately it is all about the amount of data that is available, right? So again, one of the things is that the data available on the market is becoming more and more difficult. So what is more relevant is first-party data. First-party data is the data that lies within companies that you, as a company, have on your players, and utilization of that data is more and more crucial for growth strategies going forward. So that consolidation means that you kind of get these powerhouses on first-party data, which are expected to kind of, lead the market, which will make it a lot more difficult for other parties that are maybe smaller, or even parties that would like to make an entry into the market. And I think that is one important thing to note. Then the second part is, I might not be the only person saying that on all the interviews that you're doing, but it's like, how does the future look like in terms of the NFTs, metaverse, crypto and gaming? There is a lot said about that. I think there is a hell of a lot to figure out, even for myself. Like, I understand some of the basics. I understand a bit how, let's say, economy of these kind of games might be working. I see how it can be very attractive from, let's say, a marketing perspective in terms of some of the slogans and play to earn that is being used out there. In what form or shape it will continue, I find very hard to say. But I remember back in the days when we had premium games and they became freemium games, right? And a lot of people back then were saying like, oh, that's kind of crazy, because like, if you can get it for free, then why would somebody ever start to pay in it? And that grew to an incredibly large industry. And I think this whole discussions that we are now seeing on NFTs and crypto and metaverse are kind of the next big step that are going to happen. And there are a lot of skeptics out there, and I don't think that anybody had figured out, let's say, the formula on how it is going to be. But to me, it indicates a potential next step of where gaming is going to go. And it means that a lot will change as well for marketing. A lot will change in terms of distribution, the platform. So, Apple and Google themselves in the position that they will take within that scheme. So I think that we're standing like at the front of a very relevant new movement to come within the industry.
Yeah, that's a big one, I think, NFTs. So thank you very much for that, for all that insight and all the insight throughout this interview. Thanks for joining us so much, and we hope to see you soon around TSG.
Thank you very much for having me. It was cool to be here.
Awesome, thanks a lot. So have a great day, and we'll see you around.